All right, let's go to this conversation now. Water woes in South Africa are not a thing of the past, it seems. In fact, it looks like the future is uncertain when it comes to this issue. A recently published Blue Drop 2022 report shows a significant decline in the country's water quality, with 23% of the municipalities flagged as being at critical risk. Now, at the same time, Daily Maverick contributor Angus Begg uncovered that around 36 million rand was spent on deep, detailed investigations by the Department of Water and Sanitation. Now, the investigation is reportedly into about 65 of the department's top brass, who are said to be linked to either a litany of wrongful conduct, in fact, negligence and possibly criminal acts. This, of course, it says it's against South African citizens. Let's speak now about these water issues with Professor Anthony Turton, who is from the University of the Free State's Centre for Environmental Management. Prof, always a pleasure to speak to you. I mean, 23% of municipalities have been flagged as being at critical risk. How worried should we be?
Yes, good evening to you and the listeners. I think it's very important that people understand that water is not just about the volume of water that flows out of the tap. There are a number of issues that are relevant in the water sector. One is the actual quantity of water that one gets, but a very, very important issue is the quality of water that comes out as well. And the quality of water in South Africa has always traditionally been very high. It's been world-class, and it's defined by a standard known as SANS 241. South African National Standard System number 241. And all of your bulk service providers are obliged by law to provide water at SANS 241. And if it's provided at SANS 241, then it's world-class and it's absolutely safe. So then we get into another issue, and that is about the trust that the public has in the water service provider. And unfortunately, a decision was made some years ago by the department to stop the blue and green drop reporting. And that has significantly eroded public trust in the institution. But I will say, as an act of courage, the current minister has in fact decided to reinstate the blue and green drop report. And I think we must encourage him for that because I say it's an act of courage because they are now exposed to the reality of just how bad the system is.
And of course, that blue and green drop report, I mean, it really helps to also keep the municipalities in check. But I'm keen to find out, Prof, when it comes to the deterioration of the quality of water, how much of this can be put on infrastructure failures?
Well, I think infrastructure is once again a complex issue. You get various kinds of infrastructure, and I would distinguish between two kinds of infrastructure. So on the one hand, you get hard infrastructure, that's concrete walls and dams and pumps and pipes, all the machinery of delivering water from a river ultimately to someone's home or to a factory and then taking it back to the river again through a treatment plant. Then you get your soft infrastructure, which is your institutions. And it's unfortunately been the failure of the soft infrastructure. Our institutions have been failing systematically for at least over a decade. The early sign of institutional failure that I'm aware of was in the order of around about 2006, 2007, when we started seeing the first evidence of institutional failure. And the reason why institutional failure is so important is because I was brought in at one point in time to do some technical work for some legal action on a wastewater works in the Pretoria area, the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant. And the finding there was that under the current circumstances, the municipality is unable to self-correct because they locked into certain procurement systems, they locked into certain legal processes and timelines, and no matter what they do, even if they do everything correctly, they are unable to correct themselves before they have a catastrophic failure. So this is a structural matter as well as it is a question of human competence and, of course, the big ugly word that we all understand, corruption.
And I'll get to that in just a moment, especially because of these series of investigations that we now understand were taking place. But before we get there, I'm keen to find out, at the back of what you've just described, I mean, the government says that it will issue boil water notices, and this is in areas of concern. How much of this helps to mitigate the health risk posed to people who are exposed to the water quality that is not in accordance with the standards?
Yes, that once again is a very courageous step to take, but it's also a legally a required step because You must remember that the national water resource was nationalised by the National Water Act in 1998. So water has been taken out of private ownership and put in the hands of the state. And the state is therefore 100% responsible for managing the resource, but they're also responsible through their SOEs to deliver water of SANS 241 quality to the people. So there's a legal obligation. If they cannot deliver to SANS 241 standard, then they are exposed to the risk of potential class action suits against them or other legal action against them. So it's prudent for them to say that if the system's breaking down, let's issue a boil water warning. And that simply shifts the responsibility from their shoulders by saying, well, we told you so. If you still drink it and you get sick, well, it's your responsibility. The state has unfortunately had a consistent track record of trying to externalize the responsibility away from themselves onto the shoulders of the individual people, the individual citizens. And of course, the individual citizen has got absolutely no chance of fixing up the water sector whatsoever. It's not physically possible. Only the state can fix it up.
According to the report, Prof, it says that about 40%, in fact, there's a high risk of that 40% of areas, certain areas in the Nelson Mandela Bay metro may have no water by the end of May this month. How much of a reality is that when you look at what has been happening with water issues in that particular area, because it's been quite some time?
Well, that's also a very long-running, slow-onset disaster that's been coming at least from 2018 that we know. In fact, even before, the first indication we had of problems there was in 2002 when the National Water Resource Strategy was published, and it indicated quite clearly then that certain of the water management areas were going to be in deficit by 2025. And, well, guess what? We are there. We are there now, and nothing's been done about it. But the Nelson Mandela Bay issue has really came to a head when Cape Town had its day zero, 2018, 2019, in around about that period of time. And at that point in time, it was already known that the Eastern Cape was heading for exactly the same situation. And we get to, we play this broken record time and time again. The committee has started and there's public consultation and there's some statements made. But the bottom line is you've got to invest into your infrastructure. You've got to invest in your planning department. You've got to invest in the human skills and the soft infrastructure that I spoke about. And all of that takes a decade. From the time that you start planning for something that's going to happen, you've got to have 10 years worth of planning time horizon in order to make sure that you don't fall into a problem. Because remember, Nelson Mandela Bay is an extremely important part of our national economy by virtue of the fact that it is home to the motor industry. And the motor industry is an export industry, so it generates hard revenue for South Africa to sustain the South African economy. And it's been like that, for decades. And that's the reason why you've got to make sure that there's water security there, and that has not been done. So unfortunately, Nelson Mandela Bay is a slow onset disaster. It's going to play itself out as all the other slow onset disasters have. And ultimately, there's going to be a complete collapse of investor confidence there and an absence of jobs, because without investor confidence, you don't get the creation of new jobs. So we've got to understand that water is an economic enabler. Water is the foundation of all of our economic prosperity. And unless we understand this and take it very seriously, we are not going to pull out of the nosedive we're currently in.
Talking about the nosedive, Prof, I mean, we're seeing reports on the Daily Maverick talking about how, the Water and Sanitation Department itself is finding itself under fire now. There's a report that says there was an investigation into about over 60 of the department's top brass and it has not been acted upon. This certainly doesn't bode well for accountability when it comes to either the resolution of water problems, but at the same time, these very issues that are now taking place with the department tasked with performing this function.
Well, we know that there's no accountability in South Africa at the moment. It's a moot point. I mean, it's visible in all the sectors of society, not just the water sector. But if you go to this particular case, the so-called Watergate case, it goes back to Nomvula Mokonyane when she was the minister. She had a number of enablers. I'm not going to name names, but there were a couple of people that she had as her personal advisors. They were all very close to positions of authority. they were all ultimately, in some way or other, part and parcel of this process of enablement for large-scale plunder. And then when she was moved out of the department, there was a new minister brought in, Gugilian Quinty. And when Mr. Quinty came into power, firstly, he had absolutely no knowledge of the water sector whatsoever. But the second thing that happened was when he came to power, you can look at this as a matter of public record. One of the first public statements he made to the media was something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing now, that he's aware of wrongdoing in the department, corruption, etc., but that he has chosen not to proceed with investigations. In other words, he made a public statement that he was not going to prosecute. And at that point in time, I put out a public statement in my own name, and I basically an open letter to the minister, in which I asked the minister by which act of parliament, by what law, does the minister have the authority to essentially circumvent the criminal investigation process? Because if there's been criminal activities, how can a minister, without any legal authorization, simply go and intervene by destroying forensic evidence? And so what is this? So this Watergate thing is really just the tail end of that whole improper intervention by a minister who had absolutely no legal authority. And if you're either obstructing justice or you are upholding the rule of law. And unfortunately, he chose to obstruct justice. And therefore, we have a situation today where we don't have the rule of law. And this is not in our collective best interest. We have to simply get to the bottom of this, and we have to restore the rule of law in the water sector, as well as the rest of the economy, because the water sector is really just the magnifying glass that enables us to look into the well-being of the rest of the economy.
All right, so Prof, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was Professor Anthony Turton from the University of the Free State. Let's check in now with